Iverson looked like he was dead in the water.
The Sixers by 4.
Now imagine that your favorite team was able to put two of the best offensive players of the decade, and possibly of all time, on the same squad. For the fans in Denver and the rest of Colorado, this dream became a reality. On December 19, 2006, the Denver Nuggets put together a package to acquire the answer from the Philadelphia 76ers. Today we're going to look into how this deal came into fruition and how it concluded after only 2 years. Just several days earlier, Allen Iverson had just released a statement where he had said that a change may be the best thing for everyone, then moments later requested a trade. 11 days later, Iverson, along with big man Ivan McFarland, who would be immediately waived, was traded to the Nuggets for Andre Miller, Joe Smith, and 2 second-round picks for the upcoming draft. The draft picks would not turn into anything, with one player being Patiri Kaponen, who would not play a single game in the NBA, and Daquan Cook, where Cook actually made a run to the finals with the Oklahoma City Thunder as a bench warmer in 2012. Denver was in desperate need of a scorer at the time, as Carmelo Anthony was on suspension due to the brawl between the Knicks and the Nuggets just 3 days earlier. At the time, Melo was leading the league in points per game at 31.6, and the only player that could pick up the slack was the disgruntled Iverson, who was averaging 31.2. Philly would get a former assist leader in Andre Miller. So once Melo's suspension was finally over, some immediate problems started to appear. The first question was, how are they both going to coexist? Obviously, having two ball-dominant players with big egos would definitely create problems both on and off the court, but the Nuggets organization were willing to deal with these risks. In their first game together, Denver was barely able to scrap together a win over the Kings, as there were many noticeable flaws in both their offense and defense, primarily the latter. Having 6-foot Iverson on the floor is already a defensive liability, since he is not good enough defensively to stop other star point guards, such as Steve Nash, Tony Parker, and as well as being too short to defend a shooting guard. Opposing guards were able to shred Denver's backcourt defense, and as for the offense, we already know what the problem is. Even today, Carmelo likes to take matters into his own hands by calling for ISOs and starts chucking up shots hopelessly, and by luck it might go in. By trading away Andre Miller, the Nuggets lost a very efficient offense as their new point guard did not know when to distribute and when to score. They lacked a pick and roll, which probably would have been their best bet, but Iverson was too selfish to take part. Apart from the flawed offense, the answer scoring numbers also took a dip. The older AI was brought into Denver to be the clear second option behind Melo, and his usage rate decreased slightly. He did have a higher field goal percentage, as well as higher assist numbers than in Philly, and although he wasn't the same player that his younger self was, there were times that he turned back the clock and dominated the floor. Flash forward to the 2007 playoff, and the 6th-seeded Nuggets would face off against the Spurs, and would eventually lose in 5 to the eventual champions. After winning Game 1, the Mile High squad were dismal in the rest of the series. Iverson averaged a depressing 36.8% from the field, and in the closeout Game 5, AI went for a 6-for-22 performance. Carmelo was no assistance either, because this man went 8 for 20. Although they had disappointed in the playoffs, this Nuggets team still had a seemingly bright future ahead. Even the legendary Stephen A. Smith believed that this squad would go on to win the Western Conference Finals in a preseason prediction. When was the last time you heard anyone say that the Nuggets would go on to the finals? The next year was more or less the same results-wise, and although they won 5 more games, the rest of the West also won more games, and Denver dropped down to the 8th seed. This time there would be no blessing for the Nugs, as they would get swept by the eventual champion Lakers. The front office knew that changes would have to be made if the team wanted to truly become a championship contender. That meant that it was time for Iverson to move on. They clearly were looking to cut down on the salary, as they recently traded away Marcus Camby to the dismay of the Denver fans. After a few bland months, which also led into the following season, some trading rumors arose stating that Allen Iverson should expect to be dealt soon. AI was brought in to mentor the young guys like Melo and J.R. Smith, and it was time to move on. On November 3rd, 2008, the disgruntled Allen Iverson was traded to the Detroit Pistons for Antonio McDyess, Shake Sam, and the 2004 Finals MVP, Chauncey Billups. Denver would finally get a true point guard who knew how to run an efficient offense, hit big shots, and most importantly, be a team leader. Billups let big men and negative shots up, something that Iverson refused to do because he would rather put them up himself. It was also after the front office traded for Chauncey Billups that the Nuggets were finally able to pull past their first round struggles, as they made it to the 2009 Western Conference Finals, where they unfortunately were no match for the eventual back-to-back champion Lakers and were ousted in 6 games. In the following 2010 playoffs, the Nuggets returned to the old ways and were swept by the 5th-seeded Jazz in the first round. A couple of months later, Carmelo Anthony would finally request a trade to leave Denver, and on February 21st, 2011, Carmelo would become a member of the New York Knicks, where Carmelo aggressively pushed to land. After all these years, the two guys seem to have a good relationship. In 2016, when Carmelo was still in New York, he said that AI was one of his biggest influences. Iverson stated that the 2007 and 8 Nuggets team was the most talented team that he ever played with, and that Melo can only make the team better. After looking for a job for a year, Carmelo Anthony finally found a spot with the Portland Trail Blazers, where he found praise as well as lots of hate. AI would come to defend Melo, as Iverson had also had a similar experience towards the end of his career. The two will always be remembered for their dominance offensively, as well as their underwhelming time on the Denver Nuggets. So that'll wrap up this episode. Make sure to check out the podcast version of this, which is podcast only. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. You can search that up by typing in the Clutch Shot Podcast on whatever platform that you would use. And yeah, I'll link those below in the description. If you are currently listening to the podcast version, then check out my YouTube, where you will get the same audio, but you'll get to experience visuals such as the highlights, the stat lines, and other things as you listen. You can find that on my channel called MK2K Basketball on YouTube, or I'll also link it in the podcast description. So thanks for listening/watching, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.